Okay, looks like we're live. I will give it a second here for people to get involved. And I better start this timer. Brought my timer, which means my phone is here. It's probably going to go off a time or two. People don't remember that it's Shabbat sometimes. Okay, this week we begin with vaYiqra, which is also known as Leviticus, as some of you know. Chapter 15, verse 21. So I want to back up to 20 because I told you I was going to talk about something specific from verse 20 before I move on to 21. Now, verse 20 is that particular verse is specific to anything that touches or is touched by a woman during the flowing of blood, the nida, while she's menstruating, it becomes unclean. And the verse said, and all that she lay down upon is impure. And I pointed out it's laid down or sat down upon. It is unclean, and all that she wear, everything that dwells upon her, is the way we say in Hebrew, is unclean. So everything she sits on, everything she lays on, everything she touches, if you remember from the previous verse, just everything becomes unclean. But the subject of the chapter is flowing. Remember that? And it's not specific to nida. This is a flowing because it speaks about what a man does and the offering that has to be made, that sort of a thing. The way to think about that with the men is it's like what we've just recently studied on the is often called leprosy, but is actually not leprosy. It's that oozing and all that kind of stuff, but it's not connected to leprosy. So think of it in those terms, because the question immediately came up, oh man, I scratched my arm and got a little trickle of blood. No, that's not the same thing. You become unclean because of the blood, but you basically wash your body and anything that else that blood may have gotten on, and you're unclean until the evening. There's no sacrifice necessary or any of that, because it's not the same thing. That's why this word is so confusing to people, because it's an oozing flow. This is something that continues and continues and continues. It's not stopping, right? Okay, so not at this point it's not my favorite subject. In fact, if there's anything that is my most unfavorite subject, it's this one. But we do need to go over a couple of things here that are very important. This law is not, in capital N, capital O, capital T, it is not that the flow has stopped. Think about what we've been reading. It is that the flow cannot be coming out of you, right? We need to make that distinction. The flow is still coming out of you. So if the flow has been stopped in some way in which it is no longer coming out of you, that's a different thing. And now I guess I should give a warning. This is not adult as in X-rated material here. It is not adult as in a lot of cussing or something like that. It's nothing like that. But if you have kids that are under the age of 10 or 11, you may want to send them off into the other room. And then again, you may, it's completely up to you. Because we are talking about menstruation at this point. So, some guys may want to leave the room. I don't know. But it probably shouldn't, because it does affect you. Anyway, so speaking of it has stopped flowing out from the skin. If you change, technically speaking, if a woman were to change out a tampon before sundown and take her shower and all that kind of stuff, and if her flow is light enough such that she can wear that on into the next day, say into the afternoon, 1, 2, 3 o'clock, whatever. And I don't know if that's possible. This is, I am swimming in the middle of the ocean without a life jacket. I'm telling you, I don't know what I'm talking about. You women will have to figure this out. But if that is possible, then technically that woman could go to synagogue, is so long as that flow is not coming out. You say, well, what if she goes and it comes out? Well, what if she goes and it starts while she's there? There's no difference there. It's not about trying to hide something from God. It's not trying to build some fence around Torah. It's about following what's being said here. So if that is possible, and I would think that it is with some women from what I've heard, then they could still go to synagogue because they would still be clean up until they go home and change out into a fresh one, if you know what I mean. Uh, these laws are not for not the non-Jewish world. This is very important that I bring this up now. They're not for the non-Jewish world. So they are designed predominantly for Jews in Jerusalem. They are not exclusive to Jerusalem. If you live according to the law, then the law is wherever God has placed his name. So if you attend the synagogues in New York or Texas or Pennsylvania or wherever, then you live in Jerusalem, biblically speaking. So, but America is not a Jewish world. It is so. These laws do not pertain to you, say, going to work, going to school, things like that. They don't stop you from doing that unless you work for a Jewish company, or you're going to a Jewish school, shul as it's rightly called, or a yeshiva or something along those lines. If that's the case, then yeah, this stuff applies. And so if you're unclean, you're going to have to miss out. But if that's the case, I would say they're not actually a Jewish school if they're not allowing that woman to miss this time. Just saying, it's just somebody pretending essentially to be Jews who are really not. And I'll go on record, I just said that. Yes, I just said that. But if, on the other hand, they are following the law, or at least attempting to follow the law, then they should be okay with you not showing up to work on certain days, if you follow what I'm saying. The law states that God's law pertains to the Jew and the stranger among them. So if you're Jewish and you are running a company, say, and the woman, even if she's not Jewish, she should not be in your organization on those times. You follow what I'm saying? Unless, of course, that she can find some way to stop that flow and is technically clean, then she shouldn't do it. And you should be okay with that because you're the Jew, right? Same way with your schools or whatever you're doing there. But this is pertaining to the people who work for you and that sort of thing. So let's say you run a deli. Well, if a woman who works for you has a flow, you should be okay with her not being there, and you can still serve the public because they're not in on this. It's not for them. They're not part of your organization. They're only buying something from you, right? And I think that this is one of those gray areas where if you're in another assembly, in another synagogue, and your rabbi says you should be closed during those times, well, then you probably have to listen to him. I would not agree with that on any terms. But if he says that, then you have to live by that. Okay. Now, we haven't gotten to this, and I don't remember if it comes up in this chapter or not, but since it's pertains to this. If a wife has a flow of nida and the husband becomes unclean by her touch, he comes home and she hugs him and kisses him, right? And that's acceptable if if a woman has a flow and the husband comes home. There is no sin in the wife hugging and kissing her spouse for either one of them, but he just became unclean. So he's going to also have to take a shower and also have to be unclean until the evening. And that's perfectly fine. What's wrong with that? I mean, there's no problem with taking a shower every day, is there? But anyway, so if she, the kiss, the hug, the whatever, all of that's allowable, and that is not a sin to become unclean in that way, because just laying in the same bed with your wife will make you unclean if she's got that flow issue. So all of that's fine. But anyway, like I said, we haven't gotten to that. It will present itself. I just don't remember it being in this chapter. I don't think it is. It might be, but I don't remember it. I'm way ahead of this particular lecture, and so I have trouble remembering what came from where sometimes. So anyway, let's get started. Verse 21, in a very, very literal English, it says, "And all that touch in laying down you, and wash garments his, and wash in waters, and unclean to the evening." So it's not that hard to decipher what's being said here, especially if you speak Hebrew. But even in English, that's not all that hard. So it says "bechol," so it's everything. They don't make any difference what it is. Ha no ge'a. Now we've had this word many, many times. It's to touch. And I mean, if you're bumping shoulders, you just touched. Literally. You pick something up, you hug somebody, you kiss somebody, whatever. That's what we're talking about. Be mishkava, which is in laying down. So everything that gets touched in the laying down, doesn't matter what we lay down on or even where it is, the word is of the action of laying down. But it really is not limited to that, because the word is from the idea of bending the body. So to set down is to bend the body. So it's laying down and it's setting down. And that's why the sages, spend so much time talking about it being both, because it is. All right. So anyway, yeah, chabes, wash. And he wash. It's masculine here. Doesn't mean it's just of men, but it's it could be, but it doesn't have to be. And that's of that idea of to trample and to tread and stuff like that. And with the broken washing machine, my wife made me realize, you could trample and tread your clothing in the kitchen sink. And I was like, dang it, now I have to do that. Because, when you become aware of something. Anyway, our next word is begadav. So that's the clothing, the things that you wear, the little kippah, the stuff like that. Garments, blankets, towels, sheets, whatever. Those are all still under that same category. The rachats, which is to wash the body. So it's bathe. We would say bathe in English. Bamayim, which is in waters. And it's plural because there's no such thing as water. In Hebrew, it's waters, because there's no such thing as one water. Anyway, vetamet. So that's your word for it. It has become unclean because of the sitting or the laying down on and that sort of a thing. We're being specific here because earlier it said, anything that you touch. Now it's saying anything that you're setting upon. It's not necessary to say both of these things, because if you set on something or lay on something, you've touched it, right? But maybe it's necessary because it's like, well, it didn't touch it with my fingers, right? So it's to get the idea that because this particular thing is making your clothing unclean. even though if it's a kippah on top of your head, it's going nowhere near any of that sort of thing. It's contaminated by the body. Besides, who doesn't scratch their head and touch their kippah and stuff like that? So anyway. So this verse tells the woman what to do when she touches or is touched during the flowing of blood while she is menstruating. This verse is a general statement which will be followed by detailed instructions. That's why there's so much repeating, because that's the style of writing from this time and place. Okay, so our translation: and everything that was touched when laying down, I should say when laying or sitting instead of saying laying down and sitting down. When laying and or sitting down, you will wash as well as your garments, and you will bathe in water and will be unclean until evening. This verse assumes, of course, that the flow has stopped. It is otherwise impossible to be unclean until evening if there is still a flow. It's not a very exact statement there. Because the Torah is telling us that if everything has been washed and you've been washed, you're unclean until the evening, which would assume that you're going to be clean when you wake up. But if that flow hasn't stopped, you're already unclean when you wake up, right? So there's an argument that could be made here is that you wake up fresh and clean and pure and all that kind of stuff. But no, this is for the previous day that you have been made purified. Now when we wake up, we're back to the beginning. Unless, of course, what I spoke about earlier with if the flow can be stopped and you wake up that morning and it still has remained stopped, then you would actually, in fact, be clean, because it's not that you have a flow, it's that the flow is coming out of your skin, or out of some part of your body, to be a little more less specific. Anyway, verse 22, very literal English here. And all that touch and all implement that shall dwell upon him and wash garment. Well, I'm saying him, but it's really it. Garment, his. Again, it's just written in the masculine. And the way it's written, the word can either mean him or it can mean it. But even when it is in the masculine and it should be translated as him, that does not necessarily make it masculine as opposed to feminine. It's that Hebrew was written in what we call the masculine tense. So that does not always, sometimes it does, as we saw in the beginning of this, sometimes it is masculine only, but not every time. And you got to keep those things in mind when you're translating or trying to understand the Hebrew Bible. It's very important to know this. So we have vechol, so that's everything. Ha nogea, same word we had, the touch. Everything that was touched, vechol, in all keli, in all implements. It's would be any utensil, any vessel, clothing, ornaments, tools, musical instruments, arms, as in military arms, weapons, jewelry, kippot, glasses out. Just, I don't know what the word for glasses is. I've never heard that. Anyway, my Hebrew is limited, very limited to Bible Hebrew only, so I've never actually heard anyone say that in Hebrew. All right, this says shall dwell, so it's the sitting down upon, like my glasses dwell on my face, my kippah dwells on my head, or my rosh, if you like. My talit dwells on my shoulders. You follow what I'm saying? That's where they're dwelling right this moment. So that's why the word dwelling is used. Allah, which is upon, Yechabes, he'll take a bath. Begada, and his clothing will take a bath. Or hats. Okay, oh, well, all right. So he'll wash them, and then by mayim and waters, vetame and unclean, ad, which is until ha'arev, until the evening. All the same stuff. And every implement that is touched and everything that remains upon her, because we're still talking about the woman, will be washed, as well as her garments, and she will bathe in water and be unclean until evening. So you see how it was written in the masculine, but the person being spoken of here is the menstruating woman, because men don't do that. You know, contrary to some popular belief right now, men don't do that. They never have, probably never will. I don't know. Science may figure out a way, but holy cow, why? Anyway, the verse also assumes that the flow is stopped. It is otherwise impossible. So again, we're talking about this day, this 124-hour period. You go to bed unclean, you wake up, maybe you'll be clean, maybe not, because maybe the flow is stopped, and you get up in the morning and all is well, right? So you don't wake up unclean just because you had the flow yesterday and you did all that you were supposed to do, and you went to bed. When you get up, if that flow is gone, well, you're not unclean anymore, right? So there's no ritual that has to take place, that you don't have to miss an extra day or something like that. Probably why it's written in this manner, so that we would know such things. Okay. Oh, goodness. In verse 23, and if upon that lay down it, or upon the implement that she, now we do have the feminine here, that he dwell, or it dwell, upon him in touched he in it, he unclean to the evening. So you hear this very masculine sounding stuff, right? So ve'im, and if, all, which is upon, hamishkav, that's the laying down or the sitting down, because it's the bending of the body in order to recline. And you recline down into a chair from a standing position, even if you don't recline backwards. It's still the same idea. It's the bending to sit down. Okay. This is O in Hebrew, the word O, which of course is the equivalent of our English word or, all, or upon, ha keli, or upon the implements. Remember, those are the utensils, the clothing, the jewelry, the glasses, the kippot. You probably don't wear more than one kippot, but I guess you could. Asher heave yoshevet, so that she, well, I wouldn't say it that way. That dwells on her is how we would say that in English. That again, the hat is dwelling on my head, the glasses on my face, the talit on my shoulders. Alav, upon him, literally, upon it, or upon him, literally, even though we're talking about a woman. I think in this case, perhaps the implements are said in the masculine. Perhaps that's why this is in the masculine. I don't really know. And to tell you the truth, nobody else does either. Hebrew has a tendency to go back and forth between the genders, and not for the purpose of gender. They have the same tendency to go back and forth between the number, first person, second person, third person. It'll go back and forth in the same sentence, and nobody really knows why. There's a lot of speculation about it, but nobody actually knows why. Okay, where am I now? Benag'u. That's which was touched. It's from that same word, the touch, bumping, hugging, kissing, whatever, touching with your hands, sitting upon. Those things have been touched. Vo, which is it's it's a sound alike, but in this case means in it. Uh, then yitma, so it is unclean. That's that tame, unclean word, but they've added the yod to the front of it, so it becomes yitma, but it's the same word. Ad until ha'erev, so until the evening. So our translation, and if an implement lays down, or she sat on it, her touch makes it unclean until the evening. I was thinking in the wrong language when I wrote that. I've got my verbs and nouns in the wrong place. And if she sits down or lays upon an implement, or she's, if she, oh no, they separated it here. No wonder I got confused. And if she lays down on an implement or sits upon it, her touch makes it unclean until the morning. So once again, this verse assumes that the flow. No, it don't. Let's go say that it assumes that it has. It assumes that it has stopped if it's going to be clean the next morning. I don't even know if I can say that. I think that's wrong. That's a note that I probably was copying and pasting and put it in there when I shouldn't have. Because this implement, if it's been washed, because we've already been given the law that it has to be washed, just because it wasn't said here doesn't mean that now there's some implement that doesn't have to be washed. It's only unclean until the morning. No, that's not what's going on here. It's a reiteration of the previous, and it is not mandatory in Hebrew to say it in the exact same way again, because the last one was telling you that if this happens, that thing is unclean, it's got to be washed. And the point in this verse is different. The point is, it's the fact that that implement was touched that makes it unclean. It's not because the woman is icky and girls are icky and have cooties. It's probably why God had to put that in there. It's the fact that it has been touched by someone who is unclean that makes it unclean. And you see how this winds up, this law that has only to do with the flow winds up in places it doesn't belong. Because now you can't go certain places and do certain things because everything becomes unclean. Well, no. Remember earlier, the man did not have to go and shower under a certain circumstance. In this very same chapter, if you've missed it, just go back and watch the last one or two lessons on it, and you'll pick up on which one it was, because I don't remember it off the top of my head. But there was an instant where the man did not have to clean himself after coming in contact with it. So this should not be moved out of this realm that it has been placed in and put in some other realm. It's no doubt going to come up at some point. We will be reminded of this. Sorry, my mouse stopped for a minute there. Let's stop again. Something must be going on here. I don't really know what's... Oh, there it goes. Haven't had that problem in a while. Okay, so let's move on to... where am I? 24. And if lay down, he lie down man, and then it has the arrow in Hebrew, the word et. They really should just use an arrow, right? Because everyone did that back then. No, that's not what they did. So it's got the arrow pointing to her. So if lay down, he lie down, man, her, and she be minstrel her upon him, and unclean 7 days, and all that lay down that he lie down upon him, he unclean. Okay. So it's ve'im, and if shakol, this is to lie down. The primary stock has the power of bending, inclining oneself, to lay oneself down, or to set oneself down, the bending, the inclining, the reclining, because if you're going backwards, you're reclining, which you do when you sit down, by the way. Then it's yishkav. So, um, yeah, this is in fact the same word. So generally, when you see something like this where they say shakov yishkav, it's the same word. You hear how they sound different. That's a pretty good indication that you're running into an idiom. It's not always going to work that way, and this one may or may not be one. But you should start beginning to look to see it. You know, does it say? Does it explain the idiom in the previous verse or in the next verse? Right? Do they essentially say the same thing in two different ways? When that happens, you know for sure that you've just run into an idiom. Uh, okay, so if he's laid down, this is ish, so it is a man. Ota, that be with her. U to he, and it and she be, very literally. So and it happens that she is nidata, that she is menstruating. Um, the next word is alav, which is upon him or upon it. This is not that she's menstruating on him. It's that if she's menstruating, she's touching the bed. And so this is what I was saying earlier. So if he's laying in that same bed, even if they don't even touch each other, they've got a big old king size bed, he's on his side and she's on hers, well, that doesn't matter. Then we have bed tame. He's unclean. Shivat for 7 yamim, for 7 days. Vechol, and all hamishkav, and all that lay down. It doesn't matter where let me say it again. It doesn't matter what we lay down on or even where it is. The word is of the action of laying down or sitting down. I'm going to have to keep adding that. Yishkav, so that's that laying down again, the bending down, the sitting down, alav upon it. So another, see, he has laid himself down on that same bed or that same chair, even same floor, wherever. Yitma, he's unclean. Okay. So this translation is a little bit on the literal side, but it's a decent translation. And if a man lay down to lay with her, and her menstruation is upon her during the 7 days of her uncleanness or on her menstruation, anyone, that's why they keep saying uncleanness in places they shouldn't. And I fell for that same thing because it's the word nidah, so it's menstruation. Anyone who lay down to lay with her is unclean. Now that sounds very specific. The words lay down to lay down with her are idiomatic. They would normally be rendered very much lay with her. That's how they would normally been translated. But the idea would be lost. It means sexual intercourse. However, the first part of this verse is specific to a man and a woman, while the second part is woman to woman. The concern here is not whether woman with woman is a sin or not, since the section is about impurity caused by menstruation, by menstrual flow. Thus, either this is not a sin, the woman with woman part, or it is an improper place for the subject, which is the case. It is the improper place for that subject, because what if the woman lays down in the bed and her daughter lays down in the bed beside her, or her son lays down in the bed beside her because they're scared, got up in the middle of the night and they're scared and crawled in the bed, uh, or something along those lines. So it's not proper here because it's not what they're talking about. But this idiom here, uh, and it's the funny thing about it, it's idiomatic for intercourse, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be intercourse because the subject is they're both laying down on the same bed, they're sitting down on the same couch, sitting in the same chair. So you've got one of them wide chairs or something. I hope you're following what's being said here. And because there's all these different roads that the sages just spent mind-boggling amounts of time coming up with all these different ideas and just missing the whole point. The whole point is they're laying on the same bed or sitting on the same couch. You follow what I'm saying? That's the point. Okay. Oh, this chair's starting to bother me. Going on to 25. And woman for he flow blood, so the he is the blood, days great, in not time impurity her, or for she flow upon impurity her, all days flow unclean her, as days impurity her shall be unclean she. This one was a little harder to translate, but you'll get it. So vaYisha, and a woman, ki yashuv, and the woman has the flow, zuv, which is the word for flow, it's the same word. Yashuv, zuv, those are both the same word. Yeah, I know they come up with two different numbers in the Gesenius and the Strongs and all that. Of course, Gesenius numbers, the numbers were added from the Strongs, which is why that happens in the Gesenius, but Strong's didn't. Sometimes he didn't know. Well, it was very clear he didn't know the difference between the sheen and the seen. So all of that stuff gets mixed in. And then other times when he felt like, there's in Hebrew, the words have lots of meaning, right? Because it's a primitive language, fewer words, lots of meaning. So there were times when in the Strong's numbering system, when James Strong's was working on it, he would say, well, see, when they use Zuv, it's of this specifically, and when they use Yazuv, it's of that specifically. He was completely wrong. Very, very wrong. If he'd had a computer, he probably wouldn't have made those mistakes, but he saw these as two different meanings, not understanding that what's he looking at here? What's just happened? This is probably going to identify an idiom. It may not, but it's most probable. So what they did in English translations, not understanding this rule of grammar, was if you said the same word twice, they would just say, well, that just amplifies it. Well, it does. It does. But not generally when the two words are directly together. That's usually an indication of an idiom. Not always, but usually. Generally what they do if they're trying to add emphasis, the more common way is that they say the same thing three different ways. That boy was laying a cloud of smoke as he was flying across the track. running for the wind. I just said running 3 different ways, right? And in English, we use these different words to give more, I don't know, more of a vivid image of how awesome it was and how fast that guy was running. And in Hebrew, they did the same thing, probably where we got the idea. Just gonna throw that out there because I think everything came first from the Jews. It says to the Jews first somewhere. So it's Dama. We're talking about the flowing of the blood. Yamin. So now we have days. Uh, Rabin. Rabin. Yeah, it's the same word. We think of Rabim as coming from Rav, and that that's what I am, Rav, right? Well, primitive language, one word, lots of meaning. So in other words, if this goes beyond 7 days, if this becomes something that's gone well beyond or even a little bit beyond it, the day, it's greater than 7 days, right? In this case, because the flow is supposed to be 7 days. So anything beyond that becomes Ra. And in this case, it's going to be Rabin in the plural because we're talking about days. And so the next word is going to be plural, just like in the English grammar. Probably we got it from the Jews as well. Just throwing that out there. Bello, which is literally in, not, et. In this case, another sound alike, this is time. It's a certain time. It has a limit as opposed to eternity. So again, because it's supposed to be 7 days. Nidata. So if the flow, if the menstruation goes beyond those 7 days without actually saying 7 days, right? Oh, or chitazuv. Yeah, I was going to see if that was going to be in there twice, but it's not. For the flow al, which is upon nidata, the menstruation, kol, yeme, all the days, zuv, of the flow, kime, as days, still the word for day, but they've added the kaf to the front of it, so it's like, as, that sort of thing. Nidata, as in the days of her purity. So it's made a separation here. If the days of the purity have gone beyond the flow, or if she's having a flow that is like the flow, but it's not time for the flow, right? That's trying to cover both places here. Tia, she shall be. Tama, unclean. We say tame in the masculine. Tama, there's got to be a softening of that somehow. Tame. And then it says he, which is she. So if a woman, it flow blood, that's your idiom. So if a woman loses more blood than normal, if she flows past the 7 days, if days great, so if she flows past the 7 days, and it is no longer the time, or it is no longer the time of her menstruation, and she flows all the days of her menstruation, she is unclean. So I don't think I made that very clear with that translation. It's true to the text, but again, if the flow goes beyond the normal 7 days, or she's having a flow as if it were the 7 days, she is unclean as during the menstruation. That's why they've added that cough to say, if she's having this when she shouldn't be having this, then she's to treat it as if that's what this is. It's not saying that's what this is. It's just saying she's unclean. She's got a flow. Regardless of whether it's menstrual or not, if she's got a flow, she's unclean. That's the whole point. So this verse literally explains the first idiom with the second idiom, which is an anomaly, I think. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. In translating the New Testament text, I actually found something like this when they were talking about the day of Shavuot. Kepa stands up and starts to explain to everybody what they're seeing, because nobody was understanding what was going on. There's fire dancing on the tongues of the people. In other words, that's an idiom. In other words, that's great. Well, that's what happens when you have to use one of those. Let's see if I'm in sync with this. Yep. Anyway, he uses a remez back to one verse, and then when he hits that remez, he remezes back to the next verse. It's the same type of thing. In this case, that one idiom actually explained the meaning of the other idiom. It's because it's an idiomatic language. A lot of people haven't recognized that just yet. Hopefully my book will help people to see that, but it was an idiomatic language. It was way more idiomatic by the first century than it was this far back, but we were already deep into the idiomatic version of the language, even within the law. And the law has to be a little less idiomatic most of the time, but because it's an idiomatic language, these idioms are going to find their way in here. So again, this verse literally explains the first idiom with the second idiom. This is the first time that I've encountered this phenomenon in the Tanakh. Like I said, I found it in the New Testament. Interestingly, the phenomenon occurs at least once. I've already said all that. So again, the subject of the chapter is flow. Thus, anytime a woman has a running flow of blood, she is unclean at all times. She does not become clean at evening. Well, I don't agree with that. Forget I even said that. Because it's just the ending of the one time period and the beginning of the next. So she may wake up unclean, she may not. Yeah, I do. Okay, 26. All that she lay down upon it, all days flow her, as laying down menstruation her, it will be to her, and all the implement that shall dwell upon it unclean. He will be as unclean menstruation, or it will be as unclean menstruation her. It becomes just as unclean as she is. Okay, so we have kol, which is everything. Hamishkab, and that's the laying down or the sitting down, because it's the bending your body in order to sit down or lay down. That's really the image behind the word. Asher ti shakav. Okay. Here we have something I was just talking about. We have Hamishkav. If you want to look it up, it's 4904 using the Strong's numbers. And then we get to T-Shakav, which is 7901. They mean exactly the same thing. So the boy was smoking everybody he ran past. It's the same thing. He was running fast past everyone he ran past, right? So that's what's happening here. They're adding emphasis by using these different words. Or on the other hand, they're just breaking up the monotony. They don't want to say it exactly, use the exact same words every time. Not sure I believe that. Casuto taught that, and I generally do not disagree with anything that man said, but this one I'm a little sketchy on. All right, Allah, which is upon it. Kol Yeme, all the days. Zova, all the days of her flow. Kemishka, and so the laying down or the sitting down. Ni data, while in menstruating. Yeah, it will be la, which is to her, vechol, and all ha keli, and all the implements. So what it just said is everything she sits on or touches is just as unclean as she is. Asher, that teshev, so it's that everything that dwells upon her, Allah, upon her, tame is unclean. Yiyeh, and will be ketumat, and it's the same word for unclean, as unclean, nidata, it's as unclean as her menstruation. Okay. Okay. Um, Everything that she lays or sits down upon, or that lays on her, clothing, jewelry, stuff, uh, in all the days of her flow, is as it is as her menstruation, laying on it. It's as if the result of menstruation has touched all of those things. And every implement that dwells on her uh, is unclean. It is as unclean as her menstruation. So now the the text is trying to make sure you understand just how important it is to wash everything. It's not literally saying that if she's during that time and she's taking her shower and all that, and she goes in the kitchen and drinks a cup of water, that it is literally as impure as if she had bled on it, right? No, that's not what's being said. What's being said here is idiomatic. What they're trying to tell you is that it is very important that everything you touch and everything that touches you needs to be washed. And if you think about that scientifically, think about it. One scientist, when talking about wearing the mask um, for the COVID thing, right? He said for him, it made no sense because the opening between the threading, of the mask, there's literally openings in there, whether we can see them or not, doesn't matter. They are there. And he said those openings, in comparison to how big the opening is and how small the virus is the equivalent of if you took the Empire State Building and stacked two Empire State Buildings on top of the previous one. So you're three high, and you go two over and come back three and go two over. That opening, in comparison to the size of the virus, is the difference of that size of an opening and a tennis ball. That's how much uh, protection you have with a mask. You think that tennis ball is going to have any trouble getting through a hole that big? So, but to tie that to this, think about it. You have that flow, and there, the impurity of that is of such importance that it says that it's as if that cup has that blood all over it, right? But they're being hyperbolic here. It's idiomatic. It's very important that you wash your hands and all of the implements, and then just whatever happens to touch it needs to be washed. That's all that's being said here. And think about when a woman is going through that. I hate to say time period, but when she's in that time, her immune system is lowered, as if I understand that right. And how much easier would it be for her to get something with a weakened immune system and pass that on? It's either that, which I may be wrong about, or because I told you I am swimming out here in the middle of the ocean with no life jacket here. It's either that, or there is something in that that could potentially be that dangerous. So the cleanliness is very much being emphasized here. Okay. Oh, all of a sudden I just ran right out of time. But again, this is about the woman that's during the flow, not afterwards, but while you're in the flow, the cleanliness is of the utmost importance. You see why people say cleanliness is next to godliness. Just saying. Anyway, I have run out of time. If you guys have questions about this or I've missed something, just send me a text message. Don't send it to my email. I'm having trouble with that, but send it to the text message and maybe we'll pick up on those questions and things next week. I'm exhausted. I'm about to lose my voice. At least I think I am. So I want to say goodbye. Shalom veshalom, y'all.
The blessing, vaYiqra. Yevarecha Yahweh v'yish merecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.